Great. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us with us at this Lunch and Learn session, focusing on the pharmaceutical industry. So the pharma industry has been really in the spotlight for many years, but really particularly for the past year with the COVID-19 pandemic. And today we will share with you how we are supporting your industry in the listening and analytics space during this current time. So from the Talkwalker team presenting today, you have myself, I'm TT, I'm the lead of the UK pharma industry, and I will talk to you about the concept of conversational intelligence and a brief overview of Talkwalker for 10 minutes. Then we have Sam, our senior consultant solution, who will give you a demo for 20 minutes and show you the dashboard that our data story team has used on Talkwalker platform to create our pharma industry report that maybe some of you have received. And great part at the end with my manager, Ryan, who has been working in this market, for many years. So he will be the moderator at the end for any Q&A or any topic that you would like to talk in more detail. So conversational intelligence. So what we're saying is that the industry has evolved, is evolving, and digital has transformed the way consumer connect to brands. What we're seeing is that conversations are everywhere, inside and outside of the organization, online and offline, in multiple channels across client, consumer, employees, and other stakeholders. So we're using images, video, text, and speech to communicate, and this has become really more complex. And the most successful brands are able to provide this, expected customer experience with, this human dimension touch to connect on the personal level. For instance, sharing similar value, and they get to understand the voice of the customer, spotting trends. And our mission is really to help companies to become more data-driven organization and go from social listening to conversational intelligence by, having all this data in one platform and being able to contextualize all of this conversation at scale. So the next one is, conversational. What is it? It's being able to take all of this discussion happening across different platforms and uncover insights through your customer journey, from your larger system like your front end offices, application, CRM, to your customer service, your marketing tools, to external data sources like market research and social media. So being able to ingest and contextualize all of these different data sources that are happening into what we are referring as conversational intelligence, and give to companies like yourself the industry first platform with a single source of truth of the voice of your customer. So what is, most importantly, the goal for our client is to be able to monetize this data with business outcomes and be the real driver for revenue, as these are components of a business health and strategy. So from enabling growth by boosting marketing ROI to building and enhancing better products and improving customer experience, but essentially go beyond from brand loyalty to building a brand love. And this is where Talkwalker is positioning itself. So who we are. We are a listening and analytic company. We empower brands to optimize their digital strategy by understanding conversation at scale. So the company started 11 years ago in Luxembourg as a web crawling tool to gather information. And now our technology has evolved into an enterprise solution that can integrate with many data sources and focuses on this concept of conversational intelligence. So thanks to our clients and partner, we have grown into 7 offices globally, and more will come this year. Something also important to highlight here is that we built our platform from the ground up, so we own 100% of it and have a strong focus on AI and innovation. So at the bottom left, you will see that the three main categories of our use cases framework that our clients utilize to help them protect, measure, and promote their brands. We'll talk a bit more into that detail later. And on the top right, you will see that we have big loyal brands to our platform across different industry, about 3,000 worldwide. So additionally, we have been recognized by both Gartner and Forrester and have been evaluated as being the most innovative product on the market. So this is a slide with a lot of information, but what is the key things that we want to say is that we got tons of data and the most robust data input in the industry. And these slides give a great overview of our global coverage and how we help our customer contextualize conversation across different data, from media data, customer data, consumer and market data, that cover for over 150 million websites in just under 200 languages. Additionally, I just want to point out, through our Customer Data Plus product, we are able to ingest and analyze and centralize customer, consumer, market data to understand the voice of the customer. You know, at the end, our clients are looking for power and simplicity all in one platform, because they also want to break down, you know, all these data silos and democratize access to data within their organization. So to achieve that, we leverage AI to analyze text, video, image, and speech across all of these conversation channels. So now let's have a deeper look at our AI engine. So Talkwalker has been a leader, and our AI engine is the heart and spine of our platform. I will explain in more detail a few of our capabilities. The first is with the data cleaning. Our AI engine allows us to ensure that, you know, data accuracy and making it relevant to our customer is really important, and we take out all the noise that you don't want to hear. Another point is the image recognition. So research has shown that up to 80% of pictures really don't reference brands in the text, and we can do both image and video recognition here. The other part that I wanted to highlight is the clustering. So what is it? Is we contextualize and understand large amounts of data with a goal to uncover deep insights through automated data segmentation. And we will show you this unique product that is called Conversation Cluster that Sam will show you later on in the demo. So sentiment is a very big thing for us, is one of our differentiator. And Talkwalker sentiment is based on a deep learning algorithm that can be adjusted by use case, industry, by our customer need, your need. And Talkwalker has trained different machine learning models using 10 of million example reviewed by human, and we have achieved an average of 90% of accuracy. So these algorithms are able to interpret human emotion, basic types of irony and sarcasm. Translation is also a big thing for us. By using our AI engine, we can process, you know, just under 200 languages. And, you know, additionally on the platform, you can translate all the data with a simple click of a button to offer, you know, truly global unified platform. So, So today, you know, our platform is designed to ingest and analyze all this data and to deliver insight for various purposes. And this is the framework that we use with our clients. So most of our 3,000 clients globally tend to fit into this use case with the protect, measure, and promote. And today in the demo, we will be focusing on the issue tracking, consumer insight, and competitive intelligence as use case around the COVID-19 and the pharmaceutical companies that were involved in this topic. We wanted as well to show you a couple of customer stories One of them is a leading consumer healthcare company brought together many teams working together, from the BI team to the technology, the marketing, the sales, and they've worked on answering business key questions around, body aging and external pain relief product to help them understand the insight of the market and as well to build a customer-centric marketing campaign. Another leading consumer healthcare company has built a trend research platform to access real-time data using Talkwalker API to analyze, healthy eating trends by correlating their data with the social data. So that has helped their marketing team into that campaign again. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Sam.
Thanks, TT, and good morning, everyone, from a very sunny London. On the next slide, and we'll look at the trends before we delve into the report. Fantastic. So as TT mentioned, we're going to this morning quickly go through the overall trends in the pharma industry over the past 12 months, looking really from the start of the pandemic, so March 2020 last year, right up to the current day. Although, as we'll see, most of the conversation has actually really been focused in the past few months in what we call the race to the vaccine. But before we delve into that, I thought it'd be interesting just to take a minute and kind of look more at the macro scale at what we've really been seeing in the pharma industry over the past year or so. Firstly, this is a topic I think that is not obviously unique to the pharma industry. We've kind of seen it across news industry. We've seen sort of trust eroded over the past few years. But this idea of misinformation and really trying to understand, where can we get our source of truth from? Is it the traditional news media? Should we be listening to doctors? Should we be listening to politicians? Should we be listening to influencers? And if so, which ones? But really, this idea, this kind of erosion of trust and this idea of who we should be listening to really is stronger than ever, especially in the pharma industry now when we look at things like the vaccine, its efficacy, its safety. Should we be taking it? What concerns are there around that? Then we've got this topic of drug pricing, particularly in the US, but also kind of wider across the globe, the issue of drug access. So, for example, who gets the vaccine? How do we get it supplied? We'll see later on, actually, consumers are really interested in the logistics around this. So the transportation, the refrigeration, lots of questions, lots of interest around that. But also at the start of the pandemic, when we saw this real shortage of PPE, hospitals, doctors not being able to get the equipment that they needed. We've seen a much bigger trend to digital therapeutics in the same way that we're now doing everything on Zoom. You can now talk to your doctor, whether it's on the phone, whether it's across video or via email. That's definitely been a trend that's been accelerated in the past year. And finally, we've seen this growth of decentralized studies. So moving away from kind of bringing patients all together on one site, but doing these kind of bigger global decentralized studies really to help sort of rapidly accelerate the the development of treatments, drugs, and obviously the vaccine as well. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I'll just turn off my camera so my Wi-Fi doesn't kick out. Thanks, TT. So hopefully you can now all see that. This is the Pharma Dashboard that we're going to briefly look through today. As I mentioned, what we're looking at here is a mixture of conversations online going back to March 2020, right through to today. We're monitoring conversations across online news sites, across social media, forums, blogs. And as TT mentioned, we're then applying a range of analytics on top of that. So from sentiment analysis through to image analysis, whether it's looking at brand logos, objects featured in photos and videos. And we're also applying thematic analysis as well on top of this, so we can really start to understand what are those conversations and where should we be focusing our attention. We're looking at conversations around the pharma industry in general. So what are those general conversations from consumers? How can we start to hone in on some of those key concerns? We'll have a quick look at the first vaccinations in the UK and kind of how they went down. We'll break it down by brands. And what we've also done, as you'll see, is have a selection of filters for things like locations across the globe, categories. We will look at consumer concerns. So where are people sort of most worried when it comes about the vaccine? And also a bit around sort of influencers and demographics as well. So let's jump straight in. We're going to start with what TT mentioned at the beginning there, this idea of these conversation clusters. And what these really do is help you understand huge volumes of conversations. We're talking sort of millions of online conversations here. Um, Looking at a snapshot, first of all, from the start of the pandemic in March and April last year, and then comparing that to the conversations later on in November and December, and we'll see how they moved on. And you'll see kind of the main themes back in March, as I'm sure we will all recall, were largely around essentials. So I think we can probably all remember queuing outside of Tesco to get toilet paper and pasta. These were really lots of consumers' concerns at the time, unsurprisingly. We had things like how to be aware of the emerging COVID-19 symptoms. Lots of people sort of looking for PPE, how to get tested, how to look after themselves and their families. And what you'll see kind of fairly early on is there were some vaccine conversations, but these were kind of a pretty smaller part of the overall picture. The idea of vaccines sort of didn't really come into play sort of much later in the year. And then when we look at these conversation clusters in November and December, you'll see that the vaccine itself actually took up just over 1/5 of all conversations in this space. So it really became the dominating discourse. What I find really interesting about these clusters, though, is when you actually start to see where these conversations overlap. So back in December, you'll see there's lots of conversations around mental health. People have been working at home for 9 months, they've been locked down, and it really started to take its toll in winter. I think it's really interesting to see how these conversations cross over with this topic of alternate medicine and diet. So conversations around, how can we improve our mental health through diet, for example. And if we start to look at the sort of absolute volumes around this, the conversations spiked towards the end of the year. What we'll see here is those overall vaccine conversations over the past year. While there were conversations at the start, they did dip a little in summer as cases dropped and as kind of Europe opened up a little bit for travel. But that peak really hit right here when we had that first vaccination here in the UK, mid-December, when we had 400,000 mentions just around that topic alone. So let's delve a little bit deeper into the rollout of that first vaccine. And what we'll see is when we actually compare the companies behind the vaccines here, Pfizer really dominated in terms of those mentions. So over 40% of all mentions of companies were dedicated here to Pfizer, suggesting they really had that first mover advantage. And whilst we had the AstraZeneca vaccine approved here in December, you'll see actually when we look at global conversations, they only really impacted 10% of those. JJ, I think, is an interesting case study. They've had several peaks across the year. JJ's here in pink. They had a peak early on when they announced the start of vaccine trials, which subsequently then got paused. But you'll see that their spike in January actually hugely dominated the Pfizer spikes here when they announced the launch of their single shot vaccine and the efficacy around that as well. And if we look at those first vaccinations across the globe, we have that first UK vaccination here. But interesting to see that just shortly after we have the first vaccine in the US, and actually those mentions were double over there what we saw for the first launch here in the UK. So let's dive a little more into the sentiment around this. It's great to kind of see those volumes of mentions, but really how are consumers reacting to the vaccines and to these companies? And I think what's really surprising and perhaps a little worrying for me is that of all the vaccine sentiment, only 6% was actually positive. I think it's very easy to think, with this great news around the vaccines and the opening up of life again as we know it, it's kind of easy to think that there's going to be a lot of positive sentiment around that. But as we'll see, consistently throughout the year, negative sentiment has consistently overranked that positive sentiment, sometimes quite significantly. You'll see the positive sentiment sort of quite low over summer, but then actually start to spike as news of the AstraZeneca vaccine coming to life here and then actually as those first vaccines were then starting to be delivered here in the UK. And I think it's great to see we have, celebrities like Ian McKellen posting they're very lucky to have had the vaccine and have no hesitation in recommending it to anyone, generating huge amounts of engagements, even with his Twitter follower taken into account there. But obviously the negative side to that is then this huge spike in negative conversations as well. There's lots of people on social media talking about COVID deniers being receiving the vaccine, but also lots of ongoing doubts and concerns around the vaccine, and also conversations around mandatory vaccines, which we'll have a look at as well in just a second. But I think this is where our key sentiment drive out here becomes super useful. We can see those positive sentiments, so people really hopeful around this, feeling good, great to see. But when we look at these negative emotions here, I think what's really interesting is this concept of rushed. So, we had a lot of consumers on social media expressing concern that they think this vaccine may have been rushed through, and that gives them some concern here. And when we look at that sentiment actually broken down by company, you'll see the most negativity comes here for Pfizer. Again, probably a combination of their first movement, but also some concern around the side effects that people saw earlier on from the Pfizer vaccine there. But I think it's interesting just to sort of compare some of these top posts here, looking at this person, for example, who generated 3,000 engagements on her post with 300,000 Twitter followers. It's about a 1% engagement rate. But really interesting to see that this guy here generated more than double that engagement with only 10,000 followers. So again, it's kind of really just understanding who are some of those key voices who are impacting the conversation, even if they might not necessarily be on your radar at the start. But in terms of that engagement, comments, likes, retweets, there's some people here that it's probably worth keeping an eye on. And we'll come back to that idea of influencers in just a second. But let's have a quick deep dive on those first vaccines. If we look at the first vaccine delivered in the UK back in December, we'll see the brands being mentioned here, but we also see the name of the woman actually mentioned in 1 in 10 posts. So kind of great to see that. And also just see kind of how that content started to spread throughout Twitter from the NHS's main tweet there. I think what's really interesting is when we look at the most engaging content, the top post here actually came from somewhat a divisive figure on social media, but Piers Morgan generating the most engagement from his tweet with 36,000 engagements, and him declaring this as wonderful. So let's just delve a little deeper and look at what it is consumers have been talking about and mostly what they've been concerned about when it comes to the vaccine. And what we do is we actually put together this theme chart just to understand really where are those concerns coming from. We now have this down to 4 key areas. So firstly, the efficacy of the vaccine. Does it work? What's that percentage success rate? Safety. Is it safe? Will I have side effects? That issue of portability that I mentioned earlier on. So consumers actually really interested in things like transportation, storage, temperature of the vaccine. So really sort of granular details here. And also the cost of the vaccine, whether they'll need to pay for it or whether it's being covered by the government, for example. So let's just have a little bit into those side effects, because that idea of efficacy really was the main concern for consumers here. And you'll see fairly early on in December, a lot of concerns around the allergic reactions that consumers were starting to react to from the Pfizer vaccination there. And a lot of this conversation was also being led by doctors and professionals helping to sort of calm the public down. But when you delve into that, you'll also see there's lots of questions from consumers around the need for the vaccine, around its effectiveness, but also around, again, that safety and those idea of side effects. And if you break those down here, you can actually see those individual side effects by companies. So again, no surprise to kind of see the allergic reactions really were the top concern here for the Pfizer vaccine. Similar for the Moderna vaccine here. But actually for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, the allergic reactions took kind of a second or fourth place even to fever and chills, which were kind of some reports, some concerns on social media there from consumers. And so from a brand perspective, I think it's really interesting here to just understand what are those concerns from consumers, and how can we really, as marketers, start to understand how we can tweak our messaging, how we can evolve our content, and how we can start to work with different groups to really start to persuade our end consumers, our end stakeholders, that these vaccines are safe, that our products are reliable. And let's just touch briefly on this idea of mandatory vaccinations, which perhaps to no surprise is even more negatively expressed than the overall topic of vaccines, to the point that back in November, we actually even had more negative conversations than positive conversations around this idea of mandatory vaccines. And again, these sentiment key drivers really help just explain kind of what's behind that. So a lot of concerns around religious beliefs, for example, then conversations around people's civil rights, human rights. And if we break that down, you can see that this idea of the vaccine being halal certified is a major concern in the Muslim community. When we actually look at the sentiment broken down by country, though, I was quite surprised and also a little bit concerned to see that the UK here is actually highest in terms of that negative sentiment. So again, it's really helpful to be able to dig into each of these individual countries and just understand what are those conversations driving that negative sentiment. Finally, let's just touch very quickly on influencers, which I mentioned before, and the role they can play. I think it's no surprise to anyone that some of these big celebrities, the wrong word, politicians, celebrities, people with huge international reach, not just on social media, but in real life, drive huge amounts of engagement. But it's really interesting to kind of map those conversations out as well and really start to understand, outside of those big celebrities, who are some of these key influencers, both creating content and then amplifying that content across these different communities. And how can we start to listen to them to understand what are their conversations? How can we tweak our messaging based on that? And how can we then work to get our messaging out to the right sorts of people who will then amplify that message to the audiences we're looking to reach? And as well as kind of tracking how that content performs, so looking at virality maps here and understanding who those key amplifiers are. One thing that I didn't actually see myself back in November, back in January, which I think was really interesting, was this idea that actually in Indonesia, the government actually recruited Instagram influencers to take their shots alongside healthcare workers in an attempt to persuade younger people, who we've seen actually have a lot more mistrust, believe that this is a safe vaccine, and it's something that they should look to be using. So in conclusion, I think it's really interesting to kind of see, in terms of competitive benchmarking, where does your brand, where does your product sit compared to the competitors? What can you learn from them in terms of how consumers are reacting to some of those first movers like Astra, and just understand how can messaging be tweaked based on that. I think measuring public sentiment, whether it's through those key drivers, those key themes, that sentiment, how can we start to tweak our messaging based on the themes we're seeing emerging there, based on how consumers are talking about it? What's positive, what do they like, what language are they using? But also, again, what are their concerns, and how can we start to work around those concerns? And finally, how do we sort of combat that topic of misinformation? So where are people getting their news, their information from? Is it the traditional media? Is it celebrities like Piers Morgan? Or is it these influencers? And how is that content being engaged with? So we can really start to not only focus on our message, but also the medium for that message as well. And with that, TT, I will hand back over to you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I hope you were all enjoying this demo and got a lot of insight around it. So now, just on time to go through the Q&A question. If you have any question that you would like to talk a bit more detail, and I will pass on to Ryan, my manager. And please feel free to jump in if you prefer use the chat, we there as well to respond to your question.
So guys, do we have 10 minutes?
Yes.
And they can unmute themselves or type. Is that true?
For the unmute.
I don't know if that's possible as attendees. It's fine. Just if you have questions, I had questions from Sam's demonstration. So if you have some questions, just type them in there. Okay, we can unmute them. So can they raise their hands then? Q&A. No, here we go.
One question.
Can you please show the dashboard showing vaccine symptoms? Can we give the control back to Sam?
Yeah.
Sure. Was that around the side effects? I think is that what we were looking at here?
Side effects over time, is that correct?
No, it was that. Hang on a second. Yeah, that one.
This one here, yeah.
Right here, yeah. I just want to have a look at it because I didn't get a chance.
Sure.
It's
I mean,
possible.
sort of broken those down by the companies as well. So just grouping all the side effects together. The majority came for Pfizer. Again, perhaps not surprising given their early mover status. But then breaking it down by the individual companies, you've got those there as well.
Sam, can you talk about where this data comes from?
Yeah, that would be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we're looking at, as it says there, consumer-driven sources. So we're looking mostly at blogs, forums, social media as well. So kind of excluding news sources for this, so rather than people just kind of reporting on what's being said, I think that traditional media would sort of outweigh all those conversations. So rather we're looking here at the voice of the consumer and just kind of understanding what are people really talking about, what are their concerns here.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask, and was this done with you building a specific taxonomy, or did you rely on any form of NLP or AI?
Yes, it's a great question. So we kind of, I think, first broke down these different side effects by what we saw on those theme clouds. So looking, firstly at the overall conversation, the AI then groups those theme clouds and says, these are the overall conversations that we're seeing. And that's how we first came up with this idea of the efficacy versus the safety. So we then broke these down ourselves using a combination of keywords, Boolean, and then within that category, we then broke down those individual symptoms that we saw were coming up on theme clouds like this, for example. So you could also go in and add, if there's a particular side effect that you see emerging, you can go in and add that in yourself and add that onto these charts here. They're pretty flexible.
Thank you.
There's a lot of dynamism here. So some of these charts will make themselves if you just tell it to show us the top 5, top 10 most common themes inside a category. So we can tell it, the AI will pull out customer complaints or concerns or value or key concepts like economics or sustainability or climate. It will do that for you. But in these cases, when we've had a chance to do some research, we can build the dashboards to be exactly what we want to see rather than letting it be dynamic. So more questions, please. I'm interested to hear your feedback. And also we have these minutes. If you've seen this software and you can see how it might be useful in your own job or for your own company, but it wasn't touched on here, please let us know. It's very it's very easy and quick to on the fly create something that shows you the power of the tool, gives you an understanding of what we do. How are we able to get audio there? Do we have to do that manually? Soph?
Yes, if anyone wants to ask a question verbally. If you just put it in the chat or the Q&A, and I can unmute you.
Yep. Well, then I'm just going to keep speaking until someone puts a question in there. From my perspective here, this is the type of information you can get, but what we have not really highlighted in this particular presentation is all the variety of locations where you can get it. You saw on TT's presentation that it's not just online data, it's all data, all unstructured conversational data. So if your job is communicating, then for the most part, you spend your time doing the talking portion of that communication. And we're software and an insights company that helps you listen to the customer side of the conversation and respond in a timely manner, making what's more a much more natural conversation between a company and a person. Pharmaceutical companies, I think you struggle in general in the industry to be a loved brand. You're just going to be forever controversial. Making a profit off of medicine is always going to have some people a little upset, and the bigger their voice, the place where their voice is biggest is a social anonymous online. So you're going to want to temper that information with actual customer feedback. You'll have customer survey data that you can plug into this tool, and you can start to see what people are saying anonymously versus what people are saying with their name and face attached to it, what they're saying directly to you versus what they're saying just shouting out to the wind. And so you can be better at disregarding things that don't matter, turning the other cheek when it's required, or addressing things that are actually showing up in direct conversations with your customers because they're calling helplines or leaving direct feedback on your website. So all of that information can be digested by our system and shown on the same graph. So we could very much have this same information right here with a much larger variety of input sources. Anybody have questions around that? Anybody that's involved in day-to-day analytics? TT, I see you coming on. You have a question? Okay. If you're involved in the day-to-day analytics of your company, I'd be really interested to hear what sort of data you use. If you use something like what we've shown here, if we've identified any gaps for you today, or if this is something you already do, I'd like to know how you do it. I also would be eating and not participating, so really don't feel bad. The questions as they come up can be sent over to TT and myself throughout the rest of your lives, really. But while it's fresh in your mind, maybe pop over a question and we'll get back to you. Can we make this recording available?
Yes, so all the slides, the recording will be made available, and we will send you as well the pharma industry report that we have created as a follow-up from after this session.
Right on. Sam, what's the best way to disseminate information like this once I've created it in this dashboard? I mean, obviously, I'm not the only one that wants to see it. Maybe I want to show executives or members of my team. Is there anything I can do around that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ryan. I think, what I like about these dashboards is they are, I think, as you said, fully customizable. So in this hypothetical example, I've kind of pulled together all the data that I think is of most of interest. But, if you're looking to show this to someone else, you can remove some of these tabs here. You can change some of these widgets. So you can customize this dashboard in any way you want to kind of make it as detailed or as high level as you like. And typically, if I was showing this to probably an exec team, I might just want to do one tab up here with some of the key information, maybe a little layover of text here just to kind of explain what they're looking at, so you don't need to talk them through it. And then either you can give them just a link to this dashboard, so as we're looking at now, they can go in and view this dashboard themselves. Or if you prefer to send it via email, a simple PowerPoint or PDF export is a great way to do that. I think, if this is more of a real-time dashboard, let's say you're looking to kind of keep track of this on a day-to-day, even an hour-by-hour basis, you could also set up email alerts. So maybe have it come through, once an hour, or even if something kicks off, let's say we have a massive spike in people talking about a side effect here, and you want to know about that, then I think that's a great way to get that information sent across to you as well.
If I send the link once, if I click it multiple times, will it update dynamically?
It's a good question. The dashboard itself will be live, so once you click through, that will be updated. Yeah.
Yeah. Then I see no reason why I can't just post an embedded link somewhere to where the company could click on this link at any time and see the most updated information.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's cool. If I don't say so myself.
If you have any questions, please feel free. If not, I think we're gonna end here and share with you all this content and post this recording, and both and I, Ryan, will be available if you have any questions. But thanks again for attending our Lunch and Learn, and we look forward to continue this conversation with you.